Welcome, everybody, to the Utah Stories podcast. We are rebooting this program with our new equipment, and we're going to be doing a lot of focusing on homelessness and housing. And today we're talking about Utah liquor laws, the inland port. We're doing a lot of emphasis on the issues that matter, the issues that affect everyday life, the quality of life here at Utah. And we think that this needs to be done because, especially concerning homelessness and housing, I just don't think there's enough media covering these topics, actually doing a deep dive into how and why it's happening. So if you've been following us on Instagram and in YouTube, you'll notice we're doing a lot of interviews with homeless people and then homeless advocates, housing experts, people talking about what is going on behind the scenes of because what we see if you go down in downtown Salt Lake City is people on sidewalks, ranting, camping on the streets, defecating on the streets. It's worse than it's ever been. There was an article in the Deseret News just a week ago that pointed out that we're now spending close to $300 million as a state on 7,500 people. And we had Scott Howell on the program last week, and he talked about that. And he's just like asked a really good question. Why don't we just write these people checks for $35,000? Because that's how much we're spending per homeless individual on the streets right now. And, the question that the homeless people ask me when I'm interviewing them is, why won't the city just give me a place to camp? Why are they constantly coming with these front end loaders, bulldozing all of my crap out so I have nowhere to stay? And then I have to move around, and I can't. And why are they doing this so that we'll just never solve the problem? And I think it's a really fair question. And so, I'm not a conspiracy-minded person, but there was a homeless camp that was functional, that was working. It was under the freeway, and 150 people were living there. It was called Fort Pioneer. And all of the homeless service agencies were actually helping these people. The VOA, there was a dumpster. They had a sanitation system set up for when people would defecate and have to deal with it. It didn't smell. And these people were living there just fine. They wanted to change their situation. A lot of them were actually working. And the city comes in and they just bulldoze them all out. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on here? And why isn't more of the media asking the question, what the hell is going on here? And so we're doing a deep dive into this topic. I think it's very important. I think more people need to be on the streets asking these homeless people what's going on. Obviously, a good percentage of them are mentally ill or addicted, but I'm finding there's a lot of people who actually just want to get off the streets. They want to work. They want to find jobs. They want to find housing. And so I think this is the biggest problem Utah is facing right now. So you'll be getting a podcast from us every week for the next, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks about homelessness and housing is our main focus. And we're doing that today, but we're also talking to James Fowler, who's the owner of Sugar House Distillery. He's been in the business for how long, James?
9 years.
9 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on, James.
Yeah, no, thank you to having me here, Richard.
Yeah, so we're talking about Utah's wacky liquor laws, and obviously we have a state-run liquor store system in place here in Utah. Can you just give a synopsis of what that means? Because I think some people just...
So in the United States, there's actually 16 or 17 states that are controlled states. And Utah's probably kept it to a higher level than most. So some of those states just control distribution, and then they just keep track of everything. You have some states that everything comes into a warehouse, and then they go out to individual liquor stores, to where Utah controls everything from ordering, warehousing, to us going to their own liquor stores and picking it up. And we have, I think, about 51, 52 liquor stores ran by the state, and then we have what's called package agencies, and no idea how many package agencies, but just guessing there's probably another 20 package agencies throughout the state.
And this DABC is just a massive entity. 52 stores, how many millions of dollars go through the ABC?
I have no idea with that, but it brings in the state a lot of money, and that's I mean I think that's what comes down to it, that that it's really hard to see that go away, because I think that money is such a huge part of the state's budget.
Yeah, and we have a mandate, don't we, that all the taxable sales of liquor in the state of Utah go toward specific programs like Utah School Lunch and Utah Schools.
Yeah, so and actually the Utah School Lunch program is ran if somebody buys something from a package agency, then the taxes that they collect from the package agency all go into the school lunch program. If somebody goes to the DABC store, then that tax money falls into the general fund of the state of Utah.
Okay.
And I know they changed a little bit around this last year, the legislative season, but it's still pretty close, I think, to that setup.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, a little bit of background. We put on the Made in Utah Festival for 5 years. We put it on a hiatus when COVID hit, but we worked with all these awesome distillery owners like James, and to see what you guys have to go through to get shelf space in the liquor stores, it's absolutely incredible. And you described to me the changes in the system that happened, I think, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Can you tell listeners about that?
Yeah, so the state or the DABC purchased a new computer system, and that's really when things changed. They ran the system for probably about 6 months to a year, just kind of on a test. I think they did the Sandy store, Cottonwood store. They did a couple of the stores and just tried it out, and then implemented it over all the stores. And it's supposed to be an intelligent system that if something's being ordered more at a location, it would pick up on it and it would start stocking more of that product.
And it's like it's like the same system Walmart essentially uses.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all based on demand.
Yes, it is.
So if Smirnoff or Popov vodka is the #1 best-selling liquor in that particular store, they're going to just provide more and more of that Popov vodka.
Yeah. And that's where the problem starts coming in, because really what that system wants to do is just start filling up the shelves with that product. And so what the DABC did is they got a department that kind of people that go into this AI system and start changing things and saying, hey, well, we can't have all Barton's vodka bottom shelf because that's what's selling, because it's $9.99 or $7.99, and so we need to kind of change things around. And it's been a really frustrating system.
So it's like a hybrid approach between an AI system and the store employees who are probably really frustrated with it, saying, oh, but people love Sugar House vodka and people love Sugar House whiskey, so why don't we give them? So it's this back and forth between the higher ups and the store workers. Is that kind of how it's going?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think at the time, and I'm not in stores as much as what I used to be, but at the time the store managers had a lot of say. So if they wanted to bring in Sugar House, they could say, hey, we feel like it's going to sell great. They would give a little bit of explanation to somebody in the office, and they would ship it in and try it out, and they could do that. With the new system, it is cut and dry. It's got to be system generated, or there are those people, but it's pretty sheltered of.
Well, I mean, this is what I don't get about it. If you're a mom and pop liquor store in another state, you're aware of your customers' desires, you know what your customers like, and then you try to provide that for them.
Yeah. So
what was the flaw in that system where the store managers were in charge of their own inventory? Why did they? What solution? Why did they solve a problem that didn't exist?
Well, and I think that the problem at the time, they felt like that they had too many SKUs set up in the system, and there was too much on the shelves, and I really don't think that was the case. I mean, you look now and you go into a lot of the liquor stores, and a lot of the shelves there's a lot of shelf space. I mean, there is a lot of shelf space. And so that's what's really frustrating to us is you see the space that it's like we could be right up there. There's no reason that we couldn't. Mm-hmm. But really diving into that reason comes back to the commerce law, and the state has just stuck with saying that they are breaking the commerce law and that they will get sued if they give us any special attention. And really, as a distillery owner, many of us have sat down with attorneys and talked to them, and it's came out with every attorney that the commerce law is exactly there to protect them from that exact statement that they're saying, and that they have the right to sell to whoever they want and to kind of favor whoever they want, and that's the whole.
So it's a pretense.
Yeah, and so
it's a reason to say that.
It's a pure excuse, and that's what's been really, really hard with it. And
move your mic down just a little bit so you can see your face.
We've gotten some really good traction over the time, and then it just roadblocks right back out.
So do you find that you're going out trying to meet the individual liquor store managers to have a relationship with them so that you can get your product placed better?
We did. I mean, I spent probably 2 or 3 years just going out and getting to know the liquor stores, and then and that's exactly it. I started finding out, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about a relationship or helping the employees, or it is 100% on how the system is generating and what your sales are. So they want to see bottle turns, and that's really that's probably what I have the hardest problem with. Is a bottle turn is costing the state more money. It is creating them more work.
How's that?
Because if you think about it, if you have a bottle that is $10 and it moves 3 times, and you have a bottle that's $30 and it moves once, well, you got to stock 3 times the amount for that one bottle at $30 move.
But aren't they going to earn more profit on the bottle that was $10?
No, they're going to earn more profit on the bottle that's $30 because you're going to get more tax, you're going to get more revenue. So
yeah, because they're earning all their money on the tax.
Yeah,
not on a markup. They don't have a set markup.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example. We had 30% more gross profit in sales. We were in 30% less stores, but yet we were generating that 30% higher in gross revenue. So that gross revenue was creating more tax money, more money for the DABC. And so that's what's really frustrating. So, and a good comparison is Total Wine. I mean, you go in there, you got to have your low end stuff. You got to have that bottle turn stuff. And that's really what's going to make a store, that you're selling what people want. But you really need that middle and that upper end tier product.
Yeah, so they're tracking it based on overall moving of inventory rather than overall profit margin.
Yeah, and so when you're moving that bottle 3 times, to just deliver that bottle a smaller amount, or you're using less space, you're using less resources, and you're collecting higher dollars. And that's, I don't know.
How do they justify it? It's been in place for 3 years now.
They justify it off of that bottle turns are the way to go.
Because Walmart does it, we got to do it
Yeah,
that
exactly. And the legislature approved it, and I don't know if the system was set up and it can't be changed. It looks like it's pretty one-sided that it has to be done that way. But the DABC's they just said, this is the way the business is done. This is the way that we want it done, and this is how it's going to be done. And so in theory, you're supposed to get more cells to be able to get into more locations. And we really haven't seen that either. I mean, our numbers are up 15, 20% at times, and you don't see stores grow. You just stay in the exact same amount. And so it is frustrating. It seems like the people that are on top, that are in 50, 51 stores, they stay right there because their marketing dollars are a lot easier. If they spend marketing dollars, it doesn't matter what store somebody walks into, that marketing dollar paid off. If we spend that same amount of marketing dollars, we have a chance that they might walk into the Bountiful store. The Bountiful store doesn't have anything, and then they got to drive out to Salt Lake. And so that approach is really it's really hard for us distillers, but it's really hard for the distillers to get a product in the system at all. And that's where the real problem is you pay a fee and you get everything set up, and then there's really no plan to market. At that point, your plan to market is you may get a package agency at your location. And really, because there's one customer that you have, and that's the state of Utah. I mean, that's what it is being in a controlled state.
So you happen to be one of the early adopters, early distillery owners that came in the market. Is that the only reason why you're in all the stores, or you have a product that a lot of people want?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say both of those. I mean,
yeah.
I think we've made some pretty solid products, and we do some things a little bit different, and I think that we've earned everything that we've got.
Yeah.
But I mean, I look at a lot of these distillers, and it's like there's just no way that, that they, the state is putting them in, I think, 10 stores. Normally they'll like take a product, but to move from 10 stores to get a general listing, in 6 months, they're saying they want to give people 18 months. But really, you can't build a brand in 18 months. I mean, to build a brand is 3, 4 or 5 years.
That's crazy.
And kind of a big part of that is if you look at the other controlled states, there are probably at least 10 states that very much support local. They have local programs. They say, okay, we're going to give you 6 products in 25 stores, but you got to sell $2,000 a month in this product or it will be discontinued. So they have programs set up that help the distillers kind of, can move up and get that brand built. And
where do you think the direction for the DABC is coming from? Do you think the church has a lot of influence over those laws coming down?
I do. I think that the church is, it's better that it doesn't come out that way. I think that it's probably directed a little bit better than it has been in the past. I'm not answering your question here, but I will say we have Tiffany, that is the director of the DABC, that has been amazing. Tiffany's made some big leaps and bounds there. This local has been a little bit tougher, I would definitely say. But the things that she's implemented and some changes she's made have been really impressed. I've been really impressed with. But I still think that the legislature is where a lot of the hang up is. And
they're just sort of anti-liquor.
Yeah.
And they want to keep their fingers in it, even though they're not drinking, supposedly.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are basically trying to say, let's do what we can to kind of subdue the local distilleries and breweries so that they don't have too much of a slice of the economic pie.
Yeah. And that's sad because that economic pie would just be that much better if it was.
Yeah, I mean, these are good jobs. That's what I don't get. It's like they're willing to work with their cronies to get Walmart a new fulfillment center or Amazon, and they do that all the time and give tax breaks. Those aren't good jobs.
Yeah.
Who wants to work at Walmart?
Yeah.
But like your guys working there, I can see they're all happy.
Yeah.
It's like they value the Walmart jobs over the local distillery jobs, and that's what gets me. That's why we started the Made in Utah Festival. It's like, let's build our local economy.
Yeah, I was looking yesterday, and data shows that local retailers return 52% of their revenue back into the local economy, where a chain store is going to put 14% back into the economy. And one of the coolest things ever happened to me, I was starting up, 9 years ago, and I went on KSL, the classifieds, and I started calling some farmers. I bought some corn. We were going to make the bourbon. And this farmer is like, what are you doing? You're going to make whiskey out of this? And they came up and they just said, man, like, we're getting close to shutting down our farm. We don't know how long we're going to be in business. Things just aren't good. And what's really cool is 2 years later, you see them pulling up in a brand new trailer. And next thing you know, you have Outlaw Distillery using them. And you got Dented Brick Distillery using them. And all these distilleries are starting to flock to these farmers and really kind of show them a new way of, hey, we'll take that from you. You don't need to sell for feed. We will definitely, purchase that. And to see that money directly going back into the economy and kind of generating those jobs and stuff
that's a real case scenario.
That is a real case scenario.
Like this farmer is now viable because of the liquor liquor you're producing using his grain.
Exactly. And this is kind of, the water's been really tough, and our farmer down in Delta said, hey, we might not have corn for the next couple of years, but please come back to us. You might have to go find somebody else. And but that's exactly, we are playing a big portion of helping people locally, and that's really important to me at Sugar House. Like, I really try, if we can get something local, we are all about that. You know, our boxes, our labels. You know, obviously we don't have glass companies here in Utah, but
Yeah,
it is
just
it
to,
is
just
a big.
to talk about your products. This bourbon whiskey is amazing, and this had to sit in barrels for 5 years. Did you
Yeah,
say?
so we age in different size barrels, but there's 5-year-old whiskey in there. We have some. We age in 15, 30-gallon size barrels, and 53s. Our full size barrels are between
Yeah,
4 and 5 years.
when I saw you first start in this little tiny industrial space, you could just barely fit your still in.
Yeah.
It was like you and one other guy, and then I come in 5 years later, and you got the space next to it, and
Yeah.
all these oak barrels, just like the whole place totally full of
Yeah.
them, and that's just whiskey aging in there that you'll eventually be able to use and bottle.
Inventory's due tomorrow for the federal government, and we had 475 barrels today. So
Wow.
it is really cool, like, to start seeing. I remember 300 was our goal for so long, and it's tough because we start getting more barrels, and then you harvest them and empty them, put them into bottles, and at that point, you know, your inventory goes down. So then when you start filling barrels back up, you're like, yes, I'm getting the numbers higher. But
And how many times can you use an oak barrel?
we can
before
use
you-
them once.
Oh,
So,
just once?
Yeah, by
Wow.
law, to make bourbon whiskey, to make rye whiskey, or to make malt whiskey, it has to be in a new American oak barrel. So we can repurpose. We're talking about it right now. We're using our rye whiskey in our canned cocktails, but we are talking about maybe putting it into a used barrel and saving some money. Coopers are becoming harder and harder to get barrels from, and what was, you know, $200 7 or 8 years ago, or $500 now, you know, for a lot of the barrels and stuff like
Wow.
that. So costs are just like skyrocketing up, and so, you know, for something canned cocktail that we still need a decent quality. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't need to be out of a new barrel.
Yeah, I've been
or
blown
anything
away
like
by
that.
your
So-
canned cocktails. Like I've tried them all, and I'm not going to name names, but some of them just are not that good.
Yeah.
and I don't know why. But like this one, these have been consistently my favorite,
Yeah,
and
thank
it's
you.
because you're using really high quality liquor,
Yeah.
aged whiskey.
Yeah, we're using our
Yeah.
own product in
yeah,
it,
that's
so,
amazing.
Which is actually a good thing. You know, a lot of distilleries source on the open market, and the open market is just closing up now because whiskey's in such a demand. And so you're, you know, just talking to distilleries lately, some people are like, oh, we're not able to source anymore. We just got shut off. And that was kind of the bet why I did Sugar House the way we did it, doing a grain to glass distillery, is because I wanted to build our foundation. I knew we were going to have some rough years in those first few years. We were selling young whiskey, and it was out of 15-gallon size barrels. But at the same time, I just did not want to go down that road of sourcing. I wanted to build a foundation of getting our mash bills, which is our recipe, you know, figured out. This is what it is. Now let's get some age on it. And
That's the
was,
hard way for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely the hard way.
And you're one of the very few that have done that, right?
Yeah, we are.
It's
There,
like,
I mean,
like High West from day one, they were mixing different
Yeah.
whiskeys, but it wasn't theirs until what,
Yeah.
like 9-10 years into the
yeah,
company.
yeah. I mean, not talking for High West, they source most of their product. They do distill, and they do have spirit, but yeah.
Yeah,
Who
but
knows how
when
much
you take
really,
on whiskey?
who-
It's
you
like
know.
a massive amount of work and investment. And
Yeah, but there are people, you know, Outlaw, fully grained to glass, New World up in Eden is doing everything from scratch. Not only, I mean, they're working a lot more with orchards and stuff like that, cherries, you know, fruits, things like that. Jay at the Hive Winery is the same way. I mean, he uses a lot, and then, you know, Alan at Water Pocket, he does quite a bit too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, way cool. I want to tell everybody you got to try James's whiskey, bourbon, his vodka. Do you do gin as well?
We don't.
You don't do gin?
No,
Yeah, but
we bu-
everything I've had of yours is just top notch.
Yeah.
Super awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Our new still, we put a gin basket on it when I bought it, but we have. I don't think we're gonna do a gin. I think we got some other exciting things.
It's a lot of juniper
So-
berries in Utah, but
Yeah, it doesn't distill through that nice. So it's kind of funky on that Utah juniper. So
yeah. Well, cool. Awesome. Thanks for coming on, James.
Yeah, no,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're doing this as a long live stream if you're joining us live, and we're having our guests who are going to be talking about homelessness coming up. And so on the program coming up is a woman who took a hotel that was out by the airport and converted it to homeless housing. And she got the support of the community. She got support of local leaders. She's going to come on and talk about the situation in a few minutes, but we're going to take a little break, and we'll be back in probably about 5 to 7 minutes. So I'll see you soon. Welcome back to the Utah Story Show. So this part of our live stream, we are talking to a homeless advocate, Carol. What's your last name? Sorry. Hollowell from Swtichpoint. She runs a very innovative new concept in housing the homeless and making them feel more at home, more safe and secure. I'm going to be talking to her in a minute. I want to provide a little bit of introduction on why we're talking so much about homelessness on the program. So I got into this back in November. I was interviewing Main Street business owners, and they were showing up in the morning with a pile of defecation right in front of their business. And a lot of them were just so incredibly fed up with the homeless campers, the homeless people using drugs on the street, defecating on the street, accosting customers. And I think the natural inclination is to blame the homeless people. Like, why don't you get a job? Why don't you get out there and get off the streets and do something? And then talking to these homeless people, what I'm finding is a lot of them, I won't say all of them, but a lot of them, they do want to get off the streets. They absolutely want to get a job. They want to find a solution to their problem. They don't want to be homeless. There are a certain percentage who are addicted to drugs. There is a certain percentage who are mentally ill, but it's really hard to put them all under the same umbrella. And so what I decided is I was just going to keep talking to these homeless people and try to get to the bottom of this story, because the population is growing, and it's growing very quickly. And so what I found in January was there was a camp under the freeway overpass on 600 South called Fort Pioneer, and it was being run by the homeless, and the homeless organizations and NGOs were getting involved, and they were providing a dumpster. They were providing generators so the homeless people could charge their cell phones. The homeless people were taking ownership over the camp. It was a sustainable, decent situation. They found a way to have sanitation there. And then the whole thing got bulldozed. Everybody got their camps had to be destroyed. They had to move out. They had to go to the overflow shelter, or they had to pack up and leave. And this is why so many people are camping in the most strange places in the middle of downtown Salt Lake City, because the city does not have a solution. Their solution is bulldoze the homeless. And that's the same solution they had when we did Operation Rio Grande in 2016. And I would think by now they'd have a better solution than bulldoze the homeless. And of course, we do have our resource centers, but a lot of homeless people do not want to go into these resource centers. And I'm going to play a clip for you now of one woman among many who describes why she will not go to the homeless resource centers. Have you tried the shelters or?
Personally, no. I'm scared of the shelters. It's pretty aggressive. It's a lot like jail. heard from a lot of people too that the facility doesn't keep their items quite as safe as they like to think they do.
What's your response to Jamie?
To Jamie, I would say, yeah, they have rules. They don't want you to bring in bags of cocaine. They don't want you to bring in a firearm. They don't want you to bring in a knife. They don't want you to bring in that. It's kind of like if you want to go on an airplane, you go through.
I'm gonna stop it there. So Scott Howell was the guest we had on last week, and Gene Hill, and they provided a lot of excellent comments on what Jamie Draper had to say. But I wanted to get Carol Hollowell's input on this as well, and just a little bit of background on Carol. Can you describe Operation Swtichpoint and how that got started and how you
Sure.
ended up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. I moved to Utah in 2009 from Oregon and had no experience in the homeless arena at all, but I got a job with Five County Association of Government as their volunteer director. And I was seeing a lot of court-ordered volunteers. So they're court-ordered to volunteer because they need to do community service for trespassing, sleeping in the parks, public intoxication, etc., right? And I thought, there's a bigger homeless problem here than I thought, right? And so one day I was driving to work and I see this man in a wheelchair. And I stopped and kind of went, why are you homeless? Why don't you tell me your story? And he had lost his wallet 5 years earlier. And it struck me as so profound of, that's a simple problem to solve. Really? You lost your wallet? Ray has suffered from a traumatic brain injury, and so he couldn't process some of those problem-solving skills that most of us can. And so without ID, you can't get into an apartment, you can't get into a hotel. He still had his debit card that gave him his disability money every month, but he couldn't do anything with it. So I said, I'm going to get you housed, and I'm going to, solve your problem today. I'm just going to take it on. And he said, okay. And 7.5 hours later, we had him with his ID and into an apartment, fully furnished with food and a haircut, trimmed his nails that had gotten, over an inch long. And Ray stayed successfully housed for the next 5 years until he ended up having a stroke, going into assisted living, and then he passed away during COVID. And so that was really, he became the face of Swtichpoint, because if you can stop and meet an individual where they're at and figure out what are the barriers that have kept them homeless, he was one of them that you would say, oh, he just wants to be homeless. He's done the same thing. He had been arrested 63 times in 1 year, for that same little thing of public intoxication, sleeping behind the library. But nobody asked him why. And so our model, when I said to the city, we've got to do something better. I think I can handle this. Let me try. And so Swtichpoint was created in 2014 with a model of saying, you're not getting kicked out. Our shelter does not have a time limit, because our sole goal is to say, come in, this is your bed, you are here, but you have to meet with a case manager every week, because we're going to figure out an action plan to get you into stable housing.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
And unlike Jamie, who will not go to a shelter because she feels like a prisoner, you said there's not this big security check like you get at an airport when you get in your shelter.
Right. One of the things that really hit me was, I want my residents or my clients to feel that they have dignity, that they have value. And so we have to treat them the same as we would ourselves, right? So if I'm living in an apartment complex, I don't want to have to do that every time I go in, which is empty my pockets, go through the scanner, get it on the other side, And so we really try at all of our facilities to make sure that, we keep things safe, but we have the dignity and treat our clients as if they are a paying client anywhere else. And the behavior changes because we're expecting more out of them. We've seen them step up to the plate over and over again.
Yeah.
And so that's really, for me, we treat them differently.
Well, it's like you've got to respect a person's humanity
That's
and
right.
dignity, because if you don't, they already feel like crap.
Right.
And I reported about a month ago the situation I found outside of the Gerald E. King ladies shelter. And I absolutely couldn't believe it. There were these women who were absolutely insane outside, who weren't allowed to get in. They'd been kicked out.
Right.
Like I tried to carry on a conversation with one of them, and I wrote in my story, she was talking about how her dog was killed, how they intentionally punctured her intestine, and I'm not going to, accuse the shelter of all this stuff.
Right.
She obviously had some kind of schizophrenia. She thought everyone was after her. And it's like, what are these people doing out on the street? Why aren't they in a mental institution? Isn't there some
There's
place?
no room. There's no room.
Really?
We don't have enough facilities being built. I think that there's a big push to do that with the Huntsman mental health program, and with Intermountain Hospital is trying to really focus on that right now, and deeply affordable
So
housing.
there's basically a mental health crisis.
There's a mental
That's
health
why they're
crisis
outside
for
of that
sure,
place.
for sure. And how do you deal with that when you're having a lot of different types of people in a shelter, right? So I mean, that's really hard when you have one person taking 90% of the energy and you're trying to deal with 300 people in a shelter, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's part of it. But we do have a mental health crisis on our hands. I think more importantly, we have a housing crisis. And I'm going to tell you, this year, we have seen a 53% increase in our senior homelessness. And there was an article that was published just a couple weeks ago called "The Grain of America," and the homelessness, right? And we're seeing that here in Utah, where our biggest population that is becoming homeless are our seniors, because they can't afford to live anywhere, and they're on a fixed income, and so they're getting forced into homelessness, and they've never been in a shelter before. And we have people right now in our shelter that are 92 or 88 years old, and they've been priced out of the market, and so now they're homeless. And so my big push is to say, we have to figure out a way to create at least 1,000 units right here in Salt Lake County, and I'm going to do 1,000 units in Washington County, because that's the number that's sitting there right now. We pulled a number through the state's homeless information system, HEMIS, and it was 653 were homeless seniors in the homeless population that are over the age of 65 today. Think about that. So if you were able to take that number, knowing that they have Social Security or disability money, and place them into something that they could afford, something around the $450, $500 a month, think about what we could do to our homeless system, because now you're taking them out of the shelters and placing them somewhere that's safe, and it's theirs, and it's private. They now have dignity and value.
It seems like, though, I mean, Utah, as I've been a reporter for 14 years, it's run by developer/politicians. I mean, almost every person in the state legislature is a developer. Yeah. And their interest is to pad their pockets. I mean, it just is. And they want to protect their profit margins by having zoning laws the way they are. And this other side village, which would have been a tiny home community, I believe a couple hundred units, it requires changing zoning laws, like a radical change of zoning laws, which could allow up to 5 tiny homes on a traditional fifth of an acre lot. And this NIMBYism is just out of control. It's just like the residents will not go for it. And what can be done to get around that?
You know, that is so frustrating. I mean, we're battling that constantly, because if you can't fix that piece, you're going to have more on the streets. But then our communities are screaming, I don't want them on the streets. I don't want them camping there.
Yeah, and if you don't want them there, why don't you just let them be down the street at this community?
Or start creating deeply affordable housing where they could afford it instead of having to camp.
Yeah.
You know, I can't see very many of our seniors surviving winters. You know, if you're 70 to 90 years old, can you really survive a winter camping? It's unbearable, right?
And they're constantly being shuffled around and harassed.
And people steal their money, and because they're vulnerable, right? They're a highly vulnerable population. But you're right. We have to do this big push, you know, on our, you know, legislation, and say, this is how we solve it. We solve it by saying we have to make some zone changes, and we have to create deeply affordable housing that will stay deeply affordable, because that's the only way we solve homelessness.
Yeah, it's something I was looking at. I just stumbled across this YouTube video. This was a situation after World War II in Germany. You had 2.5 million homeless people. Like we bombed them to smithereens, and all these people were homeless. They figured out how to make sheets of concrete precast with the rebar in and put up a building on an empty lot in like 6 months,
Yeah.
and then house 200 people immediately, and then do this all over Germany. That deeply affordable housing was solved in like 1954.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just like the solutions are out there.
Right.
It's just the willingness is not there by our political leaders. They just see this as, oh, you know, we're spending too much money already. It's just obvious that we are spending a ton of money, but we're spending money just moving them with police overtime hours.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, you're looking at the cost of incarceration, the cost to the emergency rooms, because who becomes the primary care physician for homeless? Our emergency rooms. That's a very, very expensive way to handle, you know, medical problems, right? So it's just that's just a drop in the bucket of the true cost for homelessness. And if we were looking at what could we do if we were solving, you know, stable housing. We have 120 seniors right now living at the Point, which was the old airport inn. And we have a doctor that comes in-house every Thursday and does house calls to everybody. So nobody's going to the emergency room unless it's a true emergency room, because they're going, hey, man, now I have a doctor, right? But because you have them on Medicaid and Medicare, that doctor's saying, I can bill for house calls, no skin off my back, but I would love to be part of your solution, right? So that's part of the whole big picture, is to say, create deeply affordable housing, give them services that help stabilize them, and you've pulled them off the streets for real, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to keep going back and forth every 4 months. The thing that annoys me the most is probably the overflows. We spend millions of dollars in our state on winter overflow shelters for 4 months, and then kick them back to the streets and say, see you next winter, and we start all over again. If we could have spent that same amount of money and just created permanent housing, we wouldn't have to be doing this, you know, rotation of winter overflows every single year.
Yeah, it seems like a joke. It's all just Band-Aids. Band-Aids piled on Band-Aids, piled on Band-Aids.
Right.
And so what could be done if you, I don't know if you've met with Mayor Mendenhall, what should be done tomorrow to stop the Band-Aids but stop the bleeding?
Yeah, I think you're hitting it right on the head when you're talking about zoning. And there's, you know, if we can show that there is supportive housing in place, I think we can overcome and have some, you know, local meetings, you know, in neighborhoods to say, look at what we're doing, as an example, at the Point, where it's 24/7. We have built a community inside of it where people feel like they can thrive and that they're connected and they have a family there, right? So we have very little police interactions there. And people are doing well, and low recidivism, right?
Yeah.
So if that's happening, and we can then start having these neighborhood meetings to say, can we show you how well this is working, and repeat it and repeat it and repeat
Yeah,
it?
you got a model that works.
You could then take, within 12 months, we could have 1,000 people off the street that are paying their own rent, that are not being subsidized by the government. And we're not asking, as Swtichpoint,
I think
for
paying their
operation.
own rent is critical
It's
too.
and it gives them so much dignity,
Yeah.
right? And they feel valued. And not only that, but we put people to work. So we say, hey, do you want to help in the kitchen? Do you want to be the shuttle driver? Do you want to, you know, work on maintenance? Do you want to work on our vehicles? Whatever it takes to say, if you don't have enough money to pay your rent, let's either hook you up on Easter Sills because you qualify, or put you on 1099. And they then start taking pride in their own house, right?
Yeah.
And our grounds are clean. You know, we don't have any needles anywhere. There's no cigarette butts anywhere, because our residents then say, this is my house, right? And that's what I would love, you know, for really Salt Lake County community members to see, is to say, this is how you solve it, is by creating the opportunity for them to become engaged in something that makes them feel valuable.
Yeah. And I think to get there, we all need to take ownership over the problem.
That's right.
And the problem is NIMBYism, first of all. I mean, people just don't want it in their backyard, and they protest it, and they say this can't happen here.
Yeah.
But it's like the space is definitely there, and the buildings are there. There's
Buildings
a
are
public,
there,
there's
yeah.
the old public safety building on, I believe it's 200 South and 300 East. They built some Magnolia project that was $17 million. There's a building standing there already. I'm sure it would cost a ton to gut it and turn it into housing, but that could be a couple hundred housing units right there.
Right.
And it's just like I think that there's just not the political will or the public will to actually solve the problem. And
I don't think people see it yet, right? Like, they don't see the solutions. They've seen the problems and they're tired, and so they're now plugging their ears to the problem because it's been going on for so many years. But instead, let's really start vocalizing the solutions. One great example was I walked in yesterday, and a volunteer from St. Mark's Episcopal Church is teaching piano lessons. So a lady had donated a piano, and then we have a community member offering to teach piano lessons. And here you have seniors who have wanted to play or maybe haven't played in 30, 40 years, playing the piano and feeling, so every half hour people are signing up to sign up for piano lessons. To me, that is like, it's so beautiful to see somebody come off a street and go, you want me, right? You want me, and you want me to be part of here. And somebody's willing to teach me something that I thought only rich people could have, which is a piano lesson, right?
Yeah.
Or taking them to the museum. It's that kind of thing. We took a group of about 40 to the Red Hills Garden. And I had never been up there because I live in St. George most of the time. And people were so kind to them, right? And we had prepared them to say, hey, we're going to bring a bunch of our residents that live at the point. And these seniors had the time of their life on these little field trips, right? That's what the community needs to hear is, once you're building these communities, they're part of your community.
Yeah.
And they are
think
keeping...
that's what people don't understand.
Right.
They want to be a part of the community.
And they don't want to be kicked back out.
They don't want to feel like outcast or ostracized.
Right.
They're going to take care of the grounds.
Right.
I mean, there's the examples in Austin already.
Yeah, I love
And
Community First Village.
Yeah, it's just amazing what can happen if people just look at them as people with dignity who need to find a place in a community rather than please get out of here and
Right.
go someplace else. It's just
Right.
But yeah, I thanks so much for coming on the program, Carol. I really
thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Yeah.
All right, and so next up we've got Robin Pendergrass, which is a gentleman I met a few months ago. He was a photographer for Time Magazine, the New York Times. He's stationed here out of Salt Lake City. He's watched the homeless population explode, and he's taking photos, incredible photos of what's actually going on. And he's going to join us in a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Welcome, folks, to the Utah Stories program. Today on the show, my guest is Robin Pendergrass, and he has been a photographer for the New York Times, Time Magazine, a plethora of others. He's a well-known photographer, and he's been stationed here in Salt Lake City for 8 years, and he's been covering the homeless situation from the ground up. And I want to tell you first by introduction why you should care about the homeless situation. Obviously, in Salt Lake City, it has been getting out of control. We're seeing homeless people camping on Main Street. That's where it first drew my attention. All these local business owners dealing with the problem of human defecation in front of their business when they're showing up. Homeless people camping on Main Street, camping in downtown. And the frustration level is getting to a boiling point on both sides. People are super frustrated with where the homeless people are camping and the lack of sanitation, and homeless people are getting extremely frustrated because they have nowhere to go. I mean, literally, they have nowhere to go. And the city is dealing with the situation by putting Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid on the problem by moving them around, using police overtime hours, putting all their stuff into dumpsters, using front-end loaders, and it's absolutely insane because the homeless people could solve this problem on their own if they were just allowed a place to camp. And it could be a place to camp where there is sanitation in place, where there's dumpsters, where there's no mess. And just that situation was built back in January. I covered that in another story, but it seems like the city has no will to actually solve the problem. And they could solve the problem, but I guess there's a problem with NIMBYism. Nobody wants to have a homeless camp in their backyard. But I think it's a problem we all need to embrace. We all need to work together to solve. And I really appreciate having Robin on the program today because he's taking that initiative to get the faces of these homeless people out there to share their stories. And it's so nice to finally meet you, Robin.
Glad to be here.
We've been going back and forth through email a lot.
I'm really glad that you're taking the time, the opportunity to expose this, really expose it, because my involvement with the homeless in Salt Lake really started about 4 or 5 years ago. And what happened was there was a newspaper, the New York Times, was doing a story on Operation Rio. Then it was new, then it was an opportunity. And I got called and asked, can you give us 3 or 4 days of shooting, which I did. Maybe 500, 600, 700 images, I don't remember. But ultimately the story ran, and what happened is I kind of got hooked on the situation, and even then, how mismanaged it was, how poorly there was a response to the homeless people, simple things that they needed, that type of thing. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of all of this, and this has been going on with me. Even this weekend, I'm going to be delivering 15, 20 cases of water and things to some of the encampments because they don't have it. They don't have the simplicity of any kind of a program that supports them.
Well, it just seems like the biggest problem is none of our leaders are willing to go talk to the homeless people. I mean, if they were, they would realize the solutions are there. These people know what the solutions are.
Of course.
They don't want to talk to them.
Of course. I mean, when about 3-4 months ago, there was an abatement, which is a way of life in Salt Lake City, involving dump trucks, back-end loaders, front loaders, whatever you want to call it, police, health department. And it's like they almost take pride in coming in and in a matter of 3 or 4 hours destroying an entire encampment where these folks might be living. I've seen them. I've taken pictures of many of them, some of which I've shared with you.
I want to just bring up on the screen some of these pictures, if we can.
Some of the
we'll scroll through while you talk.
Sure. Some of the embankments, many of the embankments I've actually been to, and taken pictures and listened to the conflict that takes place with the homeless folks in the encampment. People are there to help out individuals. The Salt Lake City Police, Health Department, sometimes social workers from the city of Salt Lake City, I assume. But, the reality is, Richard, they're worthless. They don't do anything. This is taking place.
The social workers aren't.
No, they're not doing anything. The day of the Camp Pioneer abatement, they just walked around. Ironically, they all had bulletproof vests on, which I don't understand why. But this type of stereotype situation has been crafted again and again and again, and the result is it's a nightmare. All of a sudden, you've got, in the case of Camp Pioneer, 55, 60 homeless people. The dump trucks are full. They're gone. Their homes are gone. In some cases, medicines they might have are gone. Everything is just scraped up, and these folks are turned away with the intent of saying, well, why don't you go to a shelter which is full? Or these folks are petrified of shelters because of the danger, robberies, this type of thing. But the point is that at these abatements, the lack of humanity is so evident. Homeless people crying, homeless people, grabbing a grocery cart and loading whatever they can. This type of thing. And it's sad. And I see that even coming over here today, people on the streets with their grocery carts. So they're looking for shade, any kind of shade that they can find, just to cool down 4 or 5 degrees. Ultimately, they'll find an individual place, but there are encampments that I'll be going to this weekend to help out and even to talk to them. Exchange.
And they actually so appreciate when you actually just want to talk to them.
Yeah.
I know I've had a couple of run-ins where people obviously didn't want to talk, and no problem. But when you actually sit down and speak with them and get their story, and on the program, before you was Carol Hollowell, her whole operation, her Swtichpoint NGO, which is a whole different paradigm on how to run a long-term housing facility, is just like start by just talking to these people and get their story.
Little respect, little dignity. The theme of all this is we are humans. We are humans. Stacy, who's now at the other encampment that I'll be going to, she's kind of taken a leadership.
She was the leader of Pioneer.
Camp Pioneer. She was the one that was on the front page of the Tribune with, the quote, "We are humans." And the reality is, I don't think a lot of people understand that. I know that's pretty simplistic. They don't, give a darn. They walk right by. It's sad beyond belief when you understand and accept the reality. These are human beings that are laying out on grassways.
Yeah.
I had a very sad incident that took place a couple of weeks ago near the 600 East Smiths and Trader Joe's, that area, that shopping center. But there was a guy, there's 4 or 5 people that hung out that it was a hot day. And I had gone to Trader Joe's. That's where I buy all the water that I load into my car. And they graciously load anything I can get in there, they'll put in there. But so that the Friday night before, I stopped, I pulled into the parking lot, got water out for Joe and 3 other people. 2 or 3 bottles. They've got to stay hydrated. You've got to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason, I came back the next morning, and the other 3 people were there. They were still asleep or resting, and Joe was still leaning up against the tree. So I went over with water to him initially, and said hello, Joe, and he didn't move. He was dead.
Wow.
He was dead. He had been sitting there for, according to the police and the medical examiner, maybe 4, 5, 6 hours.
Wow.
Just sitting there.
And this was where again?
It was on 600 East, 400 South.
Oh yeah.
On the the west side.
There's an empty $1 or something right
yeah,
there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But it's right across the street from Ace Hardware, and there's a lot of collection right now of homeless people that come in. They put their tents up, they put their sleeping bags, they have their dogs, and sometimes they get rifled by the cops, and sometimes they don't. But Joe, he was dead. He died that night.
How old was he?
Oh, I'm guessing about 65, but I'm not a good judge.
Yeah, Carol just said that the senior homeless population has seen the greatest increase over the past year. That it's up like 25%.
Absolutely.
Because seniors are now getting priced out of the market.
Absolutely.
And they're just ending up on the streets. And there's nowhere for them to go.
No, and I mean, that's it. There is nowhere.
And it's like I told Carol that this is a solvable problem. Absolutely. I mean, it's not like there's just nothing we can do. It's just zoning. If we allow for zoning laws to change, you could put a tiny home community in Magna on 20 acres and have 500 units.
Yeah.
If she just said, if we have 1,000 units right now, all the seniors who are on the streets, all the people who are the most vulnerable would be off the streets.
I agree. And you know, the other side academy, the other side village,
Yeah.
that's all evolving, but slowly. I mean, I'm plugged into them too.
Have they broken ground, or is it making progress?
No,
or?
they haven't broken ground yet. They're dealing apparently. I'll actually see them tomorrow, but they're dealing with zoning issues and NIMBY, and you know, I don't know totally everything that's going on, so I don't want to speak out of turn. Even though the concept of what they're doing has been used in other parts of the country,
in
which
Austin,
I've been
and
to.
It's amazing.
And in some places it's failed, and some places like Austin, Texas, it's worked. But it takes a lot of commitment by the occupants, the homeless, and also the people that are working with them, supporting them. Now here, you know, it's a misconception that you can just take people off the street, put them in a shelter, you know, wash your hands and move on. It doesn't happen like that. There's medical issues, there's mental issues that all have to have an interceding type of product come in, whether it's an agency or an individual that can work with them.
Does it seem like to you that one of the biggest problems is there are so many homeless entities that they're all kind of stepping on each other's toes, and none of them have this overarching vision of what should be happening?
Oh, you mean the people that are supporting them?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It just seems like there's no communication between
No.
these agencies.
And this is, you know, it's interesting, Richard, that you mentioned that, because when I shifted from being the photojournalist to actually providing support, it became so apparent that you had all of these silos of service capability or money or food. And I maybe promoted but encouraged some of the profile people. Let's get everybody together.
Yeah.
Collaborate. There's an outfit called Nomad Alliance. Have you heard about them? It's a independent
Yeah.
group.
Scott Howell talked about them.
They've done a beautiful job. They have their 47th supply drop coming up July 10th, which I'll be there if I'm in town, but I'll be there. And they come in with not just food and whatever, but medical supplies, hygiene elements for the women, you know, this type of thing. Now, Nomad has been right there for 2.5 years, whether it's up at the mountain or downtown. But there's all these other organizations. Now, I would have thought that the homeless czars that were appointed by the governor and the local fellow, I don't know who he is, but
Niederhauser.
Mendenhall, who was that?
Wayne Niederhauser's.
Yeah,
a new czar.
Niederhauser's at the state, and I don't know who's locally, but, you know, they would have taken the initiative. Taken the initiative to let's get people together, you know, coordinate.
I don't know really anything about Nomad, but Scott Howell was on the program, and he said that they're telling homeless people, you know, continue to camp. You have the right to be here, and he believes they're kind of exacerbating the problem because their effort is not.
Oh,
to
you
get,
mean these organizations?
Well, Nomad in particular. Their effort is not to get them out of, like, they're camping on the Jordan River. There are about 20 of them there last time I checked, and they're defecating on the riverbank. They're not coming up. They're not proposing sanitary solutions. But then, what other solution could there be in the short term?
They're human
other
beings.
than camping.
Well, when I went this current encampment, which is west of downtown, it's got about 60 people, tents, RVs, this type of thing, and I've been there a few times and will be.
Where's this one at?
It's about 700 west to 200 south, beyond the UTA, but it's on Union Pacific Railroad property.
Oh, really?
And it's not the city's property. And for whatever reason, they've got other things to deal with other than the Union Pacific Railroad. You know, they run a big business, I'm told. But the reality is they've been there, and I've been there many times, and I said to some other people that I've been dealing with some money, we need to get some dumpsters in here and porta potties.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went out, priced them, and I was going to pay for it myself. You know, let's get them in there. But The road that comes up to where encampment is city road. It's a city road, so you have zoning issues
Yeah.
to prevent. Meanwhile, there's independent groups that come in and pick up trash, but remember, these are people that are living there, and all the issues that you've already brought up become an issue every day with them.
Yeah.
What do you do? Where do you go to the bathroom? Simply, where they've been good about
Where do you
bagging.
get heat? I see
or
a lot
heat.
of them gathering firewood, in the winter to stay warm.
Well, I had
That's-
at Camp Pioneer a day before the abatement that took place. I'm sorry I don't remember the date, but a day before, I had set up with a contact a huge inventory of wood on a trailer to be taken and dumped there so they would have wood to keep themselves warm. Well, that was canceled. Why? Because the tractors and dump trucks and the cops and everybody showed up to eliminate Camp Pioneer.
Yeah.
It's gone in a matter of a
That happened not so much on the sly. I was
Oh, it
covering
did.
it, and I was interviewing people, and I went on vacation to Moab. I think it was the end of January.
Yeah, I
And,
believe you're
and
right.
while I'm there, I just see the pictures on the newscast, this being abated. And I think the homeless people weren't aware of that until 24 hours before it happened.
No, and it was interesting. There was a quick response of whatever you want to call them, volunteers, whatever, where they actually showed up, a lot of the people, and lined up their cars back to back to back to back, so they wouldn't have the people that were coming to take away their tents and living couldn't get access to it.
Oh, really?
Well, immediately the cops called tow trucks. Then this is when the confrontations started to take place. In the interim there, and a picture that I took was actually sent and distributed around the country, embarrassingly, about a tractor that was coming down the road and some people, a couple of homeless and a couple of advocates
I saw
stood in front of the tractor. And I said, well, we have Tenement Square relived right here in Salt Lake City.
that. Yeah.
And that's a symbol, Richard. I mean, really emblematic of how awful it is here.
Yeah. And that is exactly what it is. It's like we're trying to live, we're trying to be peaceful, we're trying to make our lives in a very difficult situation, in a transitionary period, and you're coming in with a front end loader to bust everything up.
Exactly. And you scrape it up, scrape it along. And they did the same thing on a grander scale at the mountain, which is along 89.
Yeah.
It's not behind the Capitol, but there's a
North
mountain.
Salt Lake, right?
Correct. And they've gone in there twice now. Once was the first time about a year ago, and they had never, ever taken the time to go after the mountain, which had, folks and tents and everything going right up the mountain. But then, I believe it was mid-February, they came back again with 3 loaders, tractors, a whole lineup of city dump trucks, police everywhere. And
It's got to be so expensive.
and
to do that.
of course it is. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars that's being wasted. I believe somebody did a study, or there was some figures that came out about what it cost last year of 2021. They had 591 abatements. 591 abatements, big and small. But in the case of the mountain, it was huge. They were going all the way up the mountainside, and I spent an entire day there. It took 2 days. And one thing I did do was talk to a lot of the police, and they were telling me they just hate doing this.
Oh, I bet.
They despise it.
Mhm.
But, they're under order to keep the place safe.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's some homeless people, pictures available, starting to clean up so they can move back in, raking all the debris that was left by these people that were doing the abatements. It was a mess. Very sad, and some wonderful people.
So if you were talking to Mayor Mendenhall right now, maybe she'll watch this, what would be the one thing you would suggest to her to do so that we're not just constantly doing these abatements, so that there could be some kind of something other than a Band-Aid solution?
Well, a Band-Aid is the correct metaphor. But the first thing I would tell her is, say, Aaron, Mayor, whatever, stop. Just stop this inhumane activity. And here's what we can do as a short-term or maybe even a medium-term fix, where there's encampments that I've got images coming from around the country where cities have done that, set up with tents, dumpsters, washrooms, water sources, because short-term it just isn't a quick fix.
Yeah.
And then you've got to deal with the mental and all the other issues, but you can't do this with dump trucks and tractors.
Yeah.
That's, Aaron, what do you think? Could we do something?
I've followed other cities' solutions. In Denver, they have a sanctioned campground.
Mm-hmm.
That's not cheap. I mean, they provide the tents, they provide the sanitation services, the porta potties, and all that.
Of course.
And Jean Hill, she's from Catholic Diocese Salt Lake. She said that's almost as expensive as the shelter, but obviously the shelter is not working, and people are not in the shelters. So why not do a camp?
Well, if you've been to Seattle,
Yeah.
a similar situation there where they have small houses, they have encampments of small houses, and also around Green Lake in Seattle, which is very active jogging, bicycling, whatever. There's homeless folks there that have been occupied and living there for years. For years, they just live there.
In Oakland, California, there's this really striking image of people who've built these camps, a lot of them out of shipping pallets. And it looks like, a third world country, but these people have taken ownership over the area. There was like a grandfather of the camp who's like, I'm trying to get these kids off drugs, and I'm trying to get them back, into a better situation. And it's like, that is so much better than just shuffling these people around where they're going to have zero hope.
And the key word, what you said, is shuffling. They take them off 700 South and they move east or west. I was in Uganda 2 years ago shooting for a magazine, and there was some very distinct parallels to what I saw there in a third world country and what we see here in Salt Lake City. I've seen it in Chicago, Seattle, Portland, all the places that I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a different perspective, but here there's the capability to remember and respect the fact that these people are human beings. They don't deserve, no matter what their circumstances, to be treated like this. Aaron, are you listening? Are you listening? The police don't like this type of adventure. They've got other things to do, as we know. But and the money is there. Here, I see this money thrown around all the time from the state, and I've plugged into some representatives in the House that are aware of this. But it's kind of a bureaucratic stall. But 20 million here, 40 million there, a lot of money.
Well, Scott Howells told me the figure 300 million.
Yeah, I did hear that.
And he referenced the article that was in the Deseret News a week ago. Like somebody called him out on that to me today. It's emailed. That's incorrect information. And I looked. There's the number in the Deseret News article, but you cannot find out where is this money going. I've been trying to do that for 6 months. Like, I know that it costs, for example, $5 million per homeless resource center compared to $3 million, which it was to operate the road home.
Right.
And we have fewer beds. There's 600 beds in all 3 resource centers. There was 900 beds back then. But it's like, you try to follow the money. Do you believe in this homeless industrial complex conspiracy? That the idea is you just have this administrative state that intentionally keep people homeless because that keeps them employed.
I hope not, and I can't imagine that structure in place. I really can't. But regressing here a minute, where is that money going? where is all of that money going? I noticed today or yesterday the city decided to pay off the mortgages on the 3 shelters that were built, $7 million. That's fine, but do they really understand the dynamics of those shelters and what the people on the street think of them?
Yeah, they hate
They're
them.
dangerous.
They absolutely hate them.
They're full of drugs. They're full of guns. You get stuff stolen. You get beat up.
And I talked to a woman who was in the Gerald E. King shelter. She spent about 2 weeks there. She said the mental health crisis inside the shelter is totally out of control.
Absolutely.
And it's social workers, not mental health qualified providers. It's social workers who are not qualified to deal with severe schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And I visited that place, and outside there were 3 women ranting and so totally mentally ill. I couldn't carry on a conversation with them that made any sense, but they were obviously should have been in a mental hospital, and they're outside because they've been kicked out of the shelter.
Right,
they don't know
right.
where else to go.
And here they are in the streets of Salt Lake City downtown where the conventions are showing up or whatever, people from out of town, people from in town, in front of the restaurants, at the coffee houses. They bed down, they sit there trying to get out of the shade, anything. And, the next thing you know, a particular empty edifice has got fences around it to keep them away, like they've done all over the city.
Yeah.
Excuse me. If I were moving a business here, if I were coming here to go to the University of Utah or something, I would be very leery of what really is going on in this homeless community. It has impact everywhere. Visually, I think when the National Republican Convention took place here a few months ago, the cops scattered to get people out of visual alignment with people that would be staying at the hotels and going to the meetings in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw that. I've got
Really?
pics of it. And this is just inhumane treatment, and I've referred to it again and again and again as a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
That
And
requires,
I think the basis of the problem is we're so focused on the image of Salt Lake that we can't put a very humane camp out someplace. Even like the one that was Camp Pioneer, that was perfectly fine. It's just like our political leaders are more concerned about property values being maintained than they are concerned about the people who cannot afford housing.
well,
anymore.
and I think it's interesting, going back what I referenced a few minutes ago about the current one of the many encampments, but the current one that I'm going to with water. It's on Union Pacific Railroad private land, and as far as I know, as of this morning, they've stayed away from it. They meaning the abatement brigade, as I call them. Police come in there. It's Salt Lake City Street. They're looking. There's other issues in the camp that have to be addressed. I understand there were some confrontations the other day when I was out of town, and this is all part and parcel to the dynamics of this problem. Is it resolvable? Anything's resolvable if you make up your mind, but at least you can put a huge dent in how these people are treated, how they're respected, how they're cared for. They don't deserve what they're getting right now, and I'm afraid that you hear about L.A. and how they've taken over downtown L.A. You go to Seattle, the downtown area is totally obsolete to traffic because of the homeless. It's hard to imagine a Jehuli, the glass artist, museum surrounded by homeless on the street. And that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah,
I mean,
crazy.
And here, take a look at whatever you want, up and down 700 South, downtown, right across from Ace Hardware on 600 East. Poor Joe was just there, and ultimately he expired there.
Yeah, and I hear from the homeless people. I couldn't get it confirmed or denied by the police department, but I heard 40 people died on the Jordan River, and these people are dying of cold. They're dying from being beaten, stabbed, murdered.
Exactly.
And it's not getting reported. I'm trying to get a bit of a tab on the situation. I call the downtown police department. They don't want to confirm or deny. What kind of a PR arm is that?
Well, and I'm surprised the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, I'll have to use that.
I'm sure it could access that kind of information. I'm positive it could. But, just like it was the health department that kept track of the number of abatements in 2021, 591, 2022, who knows what's going on.
Yeah, I've got to get a hold of that and do a grandma request, because I'm sure they have it. They just
well,
don't
and on occasion I've sent information like to Chief Brown, and I've never heard anything, but I do it just to keep him plugged in to what's really going on out there. I mean, I don't know how they go about. You've got cops coming in on overtime, making minimum 3 hours or whatever it is. And these folks, particularly some of the newer ones that I've met, they're wonderful, dedicated police officers, men and women. They don't want a thing to do with this. They hate it. They just hate it. I've been told that. I would never identify them, but I know them by name now.
Yeah.
And I feel badly. I really feel badly, like I do for the homeless. I said 3 weeks ago, why can't each cop car, each police officer, have a case of water in the back seat where they could stop, whether there's one or two or three, on a day like today when it was 93 degrees when I walked in here, give them a bottle or two.
Yeah.
What's the big deal?
And why give direction intentionally to create adversarial conditions? Like, if the mayor's office or the public health department had the best intentions, part of public health is having water. I mean, that would be such a basic help in avoiding this adversarial confrontation every time they interact with each other.
A tremendous help.
Because these homeless people think the worst problem is the cops. They're just constantly showing up, telling them to move, telling them to leave. But the cops are, I don't want to, like you said, they don't want to be doing that. Nobody wants to be in that position.
Let's go back to Joe for a minute. That strip of grass, I think it's to the west of the shopping center where Ace and Trader Joe's, that's city property. But they'll periodically get complaints from some of the retailers, or maybe it comes off the assignment desk when they go out on their shift. I don't know. But even along 500 East right now, I noticed even today there's folks that have been there for a couple of weeks, and there's their equipment that they store everything in, shelves, they're still sitting there along the street. Now they're still there, and I'm scratching my head and saying, why? Well, here's some water. Make sure you're hydrated. I mean, it's very, very confusing, Richard. Continuity, it just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Spend the money, throw it out there. I mean, talk to the czars, Niederhauser, and I forget the city guy.
And he's been in place for like 2 years.
Yeah, I know.
What are your solutions, dude? Like, what are you talking about doing now? You've been watching this, and now you're supposed to come up with a solution. But I just think it comes back to Wayne Niederhauser is one of the biggest developers / politicians in the state. He works for Kevin Gates, who had the Canyon Center development, and owns property all over the Wasatch Front. Why would he be the homeless czar? It's so bizarre to me.
And the city, I mean, the question I ask Richard again and again, what do they do? What do they do? I've never seen them in any abatements. They don't show up when
He's not talking to homeless people.
Oh, no.
I mean, you could go down and actually speak to these people.
And find out who they are, where they're from, what are their capabilities, i.e. the gentleman I talked to had a master's degree at Camp Pioneer from Texas A&M. He was an engineer, but one of the problems he had is that when things got tight, he got caught. He's a felon. And it was really unfortunate because he and his wife are there, bright as you could be. And I said, I'm not going to mention his name, but I'm going to say, I said to him, what kind of engineering did you do to get 2 degrees? And he told me, and I took I took it upon myself to go down not too far to an engineering firm. I had no idea what they did, what their projects were, and I said, what are your thoughts about hiring new people? I said, oh, we're looking all the time. And that was my entree, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I explained to him who this person was. And I said, what is to prevent you from talking, interviewing, giving him a chance, background checks, find out the legitimacy? They did. He went down, had 2 interviews, got hired.
Really? Wow.
He got hired. It's a great
Cool.
story.
Yeah.
But that was strictly the initiative of talking, respecting, thinking a little bit, and then moving on.
There's a guy I know pretty well right now. I've been communicating with him because he got kicked out of Grace Mary Manor. He's not mentally ill. He has an advanced degree, well educated, but he believes there's a conspiracy to give people SSI where they're not allowed to work, and they need to keep that check coming. So you take a whole big segment of the workforce out of the picture by giving them this SSI check. And he thinks a lot of the people get sucked into that system. He's sucked into it. Do you think there's legitimacy there?
Oh, absolutely. Do I have time for one more story? Are we still good?
Yeah. Are you guys okay? Yeah.
This sorry about that. This will blow your mind. It's not really a long story, but there was an individual who was pretty well known that used to show up down by the convention center. And he was clean, no drugs, no booze, no whatever. A great guy. And apparently during the process, he somehow acquired an apartment down in South Salt Lake. Great, but he was there and he knew me by name, and I would turn the corner and park and go inside to that restaurant, get him a hamburger if he wanted one, and we just sit and talk. Well, I got to know him so well that after a period of time, somehow we got on the subject of money. And I said, so do you get paid? Or you're a veteran, right? He said, oh yeah, I got a couple of checks, and I have a P.O. box over at the post office. It's no longer there. But I said, what do you do with it? So what does he do? He reaches down into his knapsack, pulls out a wad of envelopes. A wad of envelopes. And I said, blank, what's that? He said, well, these are all the checks that I've received over the last couple of years. And I said, really? I said, is it smart to not have them in a bank? And, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. Well, a long, long story short, we had developed such a good relationship. He let me go with him down to a bank, unnamed for now, but down to a bank. We walked in. He brought his little puppy with him. He was very apparent. I mean, he was clean and clothed well. And I asked to talk to an officer of the bank, in which they were very obliging, very nice. I explained to him what I just told you folks. And it turned out that what they did is they took all the envelopes, pulled out all the checks, collaborated them by date, and they ended up, first of all, running a tape on them of how much was actually there. And it turned out that some of them were, I think the term is outdated. Mm-hmm. They couldn't be cashed, but the bank took it upon themselves to take care of, making sure he knew. And I was communicating with him at the same time. I said, this is what we do together, because he really trusted me. I didn't become part of his account, but we ended up depositing probably about $70,000 in checks.
Holy cow.
And he had a number, 8 or 9, that were outdated, or whatever that term is. And they set up an account, and I said to him, we could, sorry about that, we could talk annuities. And he didn't really understand what I was, I was trying to do the best I could as his financial, not advisor, but support.
Was he pretty mentally ill?
No,
then?
not a bit.
He just didn't
Sharp
trust
as a
banks.
tack. He just
Why wasn't he cashing the
Well,
checks like a check cashing center?
I asked him that as the bank officer, and it boiled down to he just didn't trust the banking.
Not even a check cashing center.
No,
Wow.
and now I suggested we could set up a direct deposit,
Yeah.
and he didn't want to do that. He'd rather bring it over himself, but he gets he has access.
So is he ready to get off the streets?
Well, he is. He is. He was given access to an apartment
Great.
somewhere down south through one of the organizations. So right now this is taken care of beautifully.
Yeah.
They're no longer sitting in his knapsack, and it's quite a bit of money.
Yeah. Well, so he was living homelessly, needlessly.
He was living homelessly for a long time.
He could have. He was getting enough per month to be in housing.
Theoretically, I don't think he knew exactly how much was on the checks. He knew it was retirement funds or VA, military.
It just seems bizarre.
I don't have.
And
any...
other than that, he was perfectly lucid, normal.
Yeah, and he
guy.
Always remembered my name. And when some of these certain conventions came to town, some of those people knew him.
Wow.
From year to year, because he'd be right there, and he'd have a little bucket that would say he was getting money to help the homeless and feed his little dog.
Oh, okay.
So, he was there. He was there.
Yeah.
Sometimes lousy weather. But anyhow, it turned out to be a miracle.
Yeah.
And I don't see him too much anymore because he's situated.
That's just what Carol said. You get involved with one person, take on one person and their case.
Yeah.
You're doing what these caseworkers are getting paid are not
Exactly.
doing.
Exactly.
Like taking a personal interest, like what is really going on in your life.
My degree is in journalism. It's not social work.
Yeah.
But I also consider myself to be a sensitive human being. And when I saw that headline, "We Are Humans," I mean, that just documented for me not only my position, but the absence of so many people.
Yeah.
Of so many people.
Well, you've taken what I do to 100th degree because I don't get that involved, and I have to say I'm a little bit hesitant. I have contact with two people individually, but you haven't ever regretted it, right?
No. And I mean, I've walked into the camps. I've walked up the hill at the mountain, talked to people. They knew me. Showed up with Nomad Alliance many times to get photos.
Mm-hmm.
Got to meet these people. Photographs, they're very reluctant oftentimes.
Yeah,
but
I mean, getting access
they
to
have
take
no
these
problem
great
with
photos.
me. And I always tell them the documentation is to let people know what's really going on in the streets. And maybe there might be a book coming that I may do to serve as a treasure chest of money for the homeless. I'm
Cool.
kind of working on that now.
Well, great. How can people follow you?
Well, the best thing, I do some posting on Facebook and Instagram. It's not all homeless related, but it's enough that when I post on Facebook, my friends all over the world, particularly back in Chicago, parts of the UK, things like that, they go ballistic. I've got one lady in Crystal Lake, Illinois, where I used to live. She sends me money for Bobby the artist. Bobby the artist. He's a fellow that hangs out quite frequently down at the Coffee Garden, 9th and 9th. And I've been able to get him shoes, socks, paper, because he does all of his drawing with ballpoint pens and pencils.
I have seen that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a distinguished-looking gentleman with the beard and the hair and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I developed a relationship with him.
Very cool.
Not he's not really outspoken, not talkative, but he will with me. But Gina, who's my friend, will send $30, $40, $50. They go right to Kohl's or even down to the thrift shop, outside Village thrift shop, and load up. and get him outfitted, particularly in the wintertime. I
That's
got
so
him
cool.
a box of hand warmers.
That's awesome.
Things. It's not that difficult to do.
Well,
But
I've got to have you back on. I know there's a lot more here that we could talk about.
oh yeah.
And it's such a massive, huge subject. And my encouragement for people watching is just get more involved. Just start talking to people, talk to these people, get their stories, find out what's going on, and get involved in the. I think once you start getting involved in your own community, rather than these like so-called online communities, you start to realize that you start to feel that everybody is just human. You start to realize that these people, yeah, they're making a mess by the Jordan River. Yeah, they're defecating wherever, and probably you don't want to see them, but they are humans. They need to be listened to. They have a story, and we are totally neglecting these people.
Totally, 100%.
Yeah,
Treating them like oily rags.
yeah. And when you talk to a person, you realize that each one is an individual. Each one is very different from another, and it's so you can't put a umbrella around any of them. They're called homeless, but they're all so completely different.
And they have
And-
fascinating stories to
Yeah,
tell.
they really do. I think that's how I got roped in. I'm totally addicted too. I'm trying to make a podcast interesting, and I'm gearing it all towards homelessness now, and because I think it's the number one most important topic in Salt Lake City
I
right
agree.
now, and it's being neglected. So
We have the drought, we have this, we have that, we have this, but the homeless,
yeah, it's the
they're
most
just
important.
there,
Yeah.
and they're dying.
Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing, Robin.
Thanks.
You're an
Thanks, Richard.
inspiration for me, and I really feel happy to have gotten to know you. And
We'll load up this weekend, a lot of water to distribute. It's going to be hot.
yeah, big 4th of July weekend coming up. All right, thank you so much for watching. This has been Rich Markosian. I'll see you next time.